The cop tried to sexually harass a beautiful girl. 3 minutes later, the police chief appeared. It was a quiet evening in the small town. The streets were almost empty, the shops were closing one by one, and the street lights were just beginning to glow. People were returning to their homes after a long day of work, and there was a sense of calmness in the air. But for a young woman named Aisha, this evening was about to turn into something she would never forget. Aisha was walking back from her university library. She was carrying a bag filled with books, and her tired eyes showed that she had been studying for hours. She was focused on her dream of becoming a lawyer one day. Her family was proud of her because she was the first in her family to attend college. She walked down the street, thinking about her exam the next morning, not realizing that life was about to test her in a different way. As she turned into a quieter street, she noticed a police car parked at the corner. At first, she felt safe. After all, the police were supposed to protect people like her. But as she walked past, one of the officers stepped out of the car. He was tall, in uniform, and had a sharp look in his eyes. His name was Officer Malik. In town, many people knew him, and not all of them had good stories to share. He had a reputation for being strict, sometimes unfair, and often misusing his badge to get what he wanted. "Hey, you there," he called out in a rough voice. Aisha stopped, startled. She turned slowly, clutching her bag closer to her chest. "Yes, officer," she asked softly. Malik walked closer, his boots heavy on the road. "Where are you going this late?" he asked, looking her up and down. "I'm just going home from the library," Aisha explained. Her voice was polite, respectful, because she knew it was never wise to upset a policeman. But Malik's eyes narrowed. "Home? At this hour? Show me your ID," he demanded. Aisha quickly reached into her bag, her hands trembling a little. She pulled out her student card and handed it to him. Malik held it, glanced at it, and then instead of returning it, slipped it into his pocket. "You know," he said, leaning closer, "a young girl like you shouldn't be out alone. Anything can happen. Maybe I should take you to the station for questioning." His tone was not professional. It carried a sense of threat, of control, and Aisha immediately realized that this was not about rules or safety. This was about him misusing his power. Her heart began to race. "Officer, please," she said calmly, "I live just 2 blocks away. My parents are waiting for me. You can even call them if you like." But Malik only smirked. "I don't need to call anyone. I decide what happens here." Aisha felt trapped. The street was empty, and there was no one nearby to help. She looked around, her eyes desperate for someone to appear, but the silence of the night made her feel even smaller. She thought about her father's words, "If you are ever in trouble, stay calm, and trust that the truth will protect you." She held on to those words like a lifeline. Malik took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Do you know who I am? I can make your life very difficult if you don't cooperate." Aisha's throat tightened. She wanted to shout, but she was afraid it would make things worse. She knew this was not about law, it was about intimidation. She took a deep breath and spoke firmly, though her hands were shaking. "Officer, please return my ID. I've done nothing wrong. I respect the police, but I also know my rights." For a moment, Malik's face hardened. He didn't like being challenged. His pride was wounded by the courage in her voice. He leaned in, as if to scare her further. And then, just as the tension grew heavier, the sound of another car echoed in the street. Blue and red lights flashed against the walls of the buildings. Another police vehicle pulled up, but this time it wasn't just any officer. Out stepped Chief Rahman, the head of the town's police department. Rahman was respected by the community. He was known for being fair, disciplined, and a man of integrity. He had spent years building trust between the police and the people. When he saw Malik standing too close to the young woman, his eyes immediately sharpened. He could sense something was wrong. "What's going on here?" the chief's voice boomed, calm but commanding. Aisha's heart leapt with relief. She stepped back quickly, tears welling up in her eyes, but she held them in. Malik, on the other hand, stiffened. He hadn't expected his superior to appear at that exact moment. His posture changed, and he quickly tried to act professional. "Sir, I was just checking this young lady's ID routine patrol, you know," Malik said, forcing a smile. The chief glanced at Aisha. His years of experience told him everything he needed to know just by the look in her eyes. She didn't even have to speak, her fear and unease were clear. Rahman turned back to Malik, his face serious. "Return her ID," he ordered firmly. Malik hesitated for a second, then pulled the card out of his pocket and handed it back to Aisha. His hand trembled slightly, not out of kindness but out of fear of what was coming. Aisha clutched the card, whispering a small thank you to the chief. She didn't want to make a scene, but inside she felt a wave of relief washing over her. The chief didn't take his eyes off Malik. "Officer, come with me," he said in a cold tone that made it clear this was not a request. Malik swallowed hard. He knew he was in trouble. As the chief guided Malik back to his car, Aisha stood frozen for a moment, still shaken but thankful. She realized that sometimes justice shows up when you least expect it. And tonight, it had arrived just in time. Aisha stood still on the empty street, holding her ID card tightly in her hand. Her chest rose and fell quickly, and her heart still beat hard against her ribs. The whole moment had passed so fast, yet it felt like hours. She had been scared, confused, and helpless, but then everything changed the second the chief appeared. She whispered a silent prayer of thanks. Chief Rahman walked with a steady pace, his face calm but serious. He stopped near his car and turned to Malik. The air between them was tense. Aisha couldn't hear everything they said, but she could feel the chief's anger hidden behind his firm tone. Malik kept nodding, his shoulders tense, his voice low as he tried to explain himself. The chief's eyes were sharp, not the eyes of someone who would simply let things go. He had spent decades serving the people, and he had promised himself that his badge would never be misused under his command. What he had just witnessed was unacceptable. Finally, Rahman walked back toward Aisha. His steps were lighter now, but his expression still carried weight. "Are you all right, daughter?" he asked gently. His voice, though strong, had kindness in it. Aisha blinked back the tears that had gathered in her eyes. "Yes, sir." "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded. "Go home safely. If you face any trouble, you can always come directly to me." He reached into his pocket and gave her a small card with his direct number. "Keep this. Don't hesitate." Aisha's hands shook as she accepted the card. She bowed her head respectfully and whispered again, "Thank you." The chief gave her a reassuring smile and then turned his attention back to Malik. Aisha, still trembling, decided to keep walking home. She didn't want her parents to worry. But she knew something bigger was unfolding behind her as she left. Inside the chief's car, Malik sat stiffly, staring out of the window. Rahman got into the driver's seat, turned on the ignition, and began driving toward the station. The silence inside the car was heavy. Malik tried to gather courage. "Sir, it was just routine work," he said, trying to sound confident. "I didn't mean any harm. I was only doing my duty." The chief's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly. His voice came out deep and steady. "Your duty is to protect, not to intimidate. Do you think I can't see the difference?" Malik opened his mouth to speak but then closed it. He couldn't find the right words. Rahman continued. "A police uniform is not a toy. It is not a tool to scare people. It is a trust given to us by the people. If you misuse it, you betray the entire department. You betray me. And you betray the public who expects safety. Malik's face grew pale. He had never seen the chief this serious before. Everyone respected Rahman, but also feared his sense of justice. He was known for suspending officers without hesitation if they crossed the line. The drive to the station felt longer than usual. Malik's thoughts ran wild. He remembered all the times he had let power get to his head, the times he had acted in ways that were selfish. He had always assumed no one would notice. But now, under the sharp gaze of the chief, he felt exposed. At the police station, Rahman parked the car and ordered Malik to follow him inside. The officers present at the desk looked up, surprised. It was unusual to see the chief return with one of his own officers in such a serious mood. Whispers spread quickly among them, but no one dared ask questions. Inside his office, Rahman closed the door and sat at his desk. He gestured for Malik to stand in front of him. "Tell me honestly," the chief said slowly. "What were you doing with that girl?" Malik hesitated. His throat went dry. He wanted to lie, but Rahman's eyes didn't allow him. The weight of truth pressed down on him. I just wanted to show her who's in control," Malik admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "I didn't think it would matter. No one usually complains." Rahman leaned forward, his eyes burning with disappointment. "Control? That is not control, Malik. That is abuse of authority. And it matters. Every single time it matters. Even if no one complains, even if no one sees, it matters because you wear this uniform." Malik lowered his head. For the first time, he felt the seriousness of his actions in a way he never had before. Meanwhile, Aisha reached her small home. Her parents were waiting by the door. They noticed her pale face and quickly asked what happened. At first, she didn't want to worry them. But as she sat down and her mother handed her a glass of water, the words began to spill out. She told them everything: the way Malik stopped her, how he refused to return her ID, how scared she was, and finally, how the chief appeared just in time. Her father's hands clenched tightly. He was angry, but he also felt grateful that the chief had stepped in. "That man doesn't deserve to wear the same uniform as honest officers," he said firmly. Her mother hugged her gently, whispering, "You're safe now. That's what matters." But Aisha could still feel the fear lingering inside her chest. That night, Chief Rahman sat in his office long after everyone else had left. He thought about Aisha's eyes, filled with fear. He thought about the countless other young people who might have faced similar situations but had stayed silent because they felt powerless. He knew something had to change. He wrote a detailed report about Malik's behavior, not just about this incident, but about other complaints that had been whispered over the years. He made it clear that discipline and integrity were non-negotiable in his department. As he signed the report, he made a decision. This was not going to be hidden. The department had to set an example. The community had to know that justice worked, even when the guilty wore a uniform. The clock ticked past midnight, but Rahman didn't feel tired. He felt a heavy responsibility. Tomorrow would not be easy, but it would be the right thing to do. Aisha, in her room, couldn't sleep either. She looked at the card the chief had given her, his number written neatly on it. For the first time that night, she felt a spark of safety. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew that someone had stood up for her, and that meant the world. Far away, Malik sat in his small apartment, unable to rest. His mind replayed the chief's words again and again. He had thought power gave him control, but now he saw how quickly power could be taken away. Fear crept into his chest, not the fear of the public, but the fear of facing the consequences he had always thought he could escape. The night stretched on, heavy with silence. But beneath that silence, 3 lives had changed: a young woman who had found courage in the face of fear, a corrupt officer who finally realized the cost of arrogance, and a chief determined to uphold the honor of his badge. Tomorrow, the sun would rise, and with it would come the next chapter of truth, justice, and consequences. Morning came slowly, with golden light spilling across the rooftops of the small town. Birds chirped, shopkeepers rolled up their shutters, and the streets filled again with the normal rhythm of life. But for Aisha, her family, and the police department, the day was anything but ordinary. What had happened last night was still fresh in everyone's mind. Aisha sat at the breakfast table with her parents. The warm smell of paradats filled the air, but she hardly touched her food. She was lost in thought, replaying every moment again and again. She remembered Malik's sharp voice, the way he had held her ID, the fear that pressed on her chest, and then the sudden relief when Chief Roman appeared. Each memory came with a mixture of fear and gratitude. Her father broke the silence. Aisha, you must decide if you want to stay quiet or if you want to speak up. The chief gave you his number for a reason. If men like Malik are not stopped, others will suffer the same way. Her mother nodded softly. It is scary, but sometimes silence gives more power to the wrong people. Aisha looked at the card again. She felt the weight of responsibility. She wasn't just thinking of herself, she was thinking of other girls who might one day walk the same street. Taking a deep breath, she whispered, I will call him. I will not stay silent. At the same time, in the police station, Chief Roman was already at his desk. His report about Malik was written in detail, but he knew this was not enough. He needed Aisha's testimony if the matter was to be taken further. He knew how difficult it would be for her to step forward. Many people stayed silent because they feared backlash. But Rahman had promised himself he would stand beside her if she chose courage. Malik walked into the station with his uniform ironed neatly, but his face pale. The usual pride in his steps was missing. Whispers followed him as he moved through the corridors. The other officers had noticed the chief's serious expression the night before, and they had guessed something big had happened. Malik felt every eye on him, every glance heavy with suspicion. He sat at his desk, pretending to read some papers, but his mind was elsewhere. He feared suspension. He feared losing the power he had misused for so long. Without his uniform, he was just another man, and that thought scared him more than anything. Later that morning, the phone on Rahman's desk rang. He picked it up, and a gentle but determined voice spoke from the other side. Sir, this is Aisha. I want to report what happened. Rahman's lips curved slightly. It was not a smile of joy, but of respect. He knew how hard it was for her to make that call. Thank you, daughter, he said warmly. You are brave. Come to the station. I will make sure you are safe, and you will be heard. When Aisha arrived with her father, the entire station seemed to pause. Officers looked at her with curiosity, but also with respect, because they knew the chief would not allow anyone to harm her dignity. Rahman himself walked to the entrance to welcome her. Don't be afraid, he said gently. You are not alone. In his office, she recounted everything, step by step, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Her father sat beside her, his hand resting on hers, giving her strength. Rahman listened carefully, writing down every detail. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, Your words will bring justice, not only for you but for others. I promise this will not be ignored. With her testimony recorded, Rahman called in senior officers to review the case. Malik was summoned to the conference room. The moment he entered, he knew the walls were closing in. Aisha and her father were seated on one side, the chief and 2 senior inspectors on the other. The room was filled with a silence so heavy that Malik felt sweat on his forehead. Rahman spoke first. Officer Malik, This young woman has come forward with a statement about your actions last night. Before we proceed further, do you have anything to say? Malik shifted uneasily. His voice cracked as he muttered, "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. I was only checking her ID. Maybe she misread my intentions." Aisha's father stood up, his voice strong. "Misunderstanding? You kept her ID in your pocket, you threatened her, and you stood too close to her when no one else was around. That is not duty. That is abuse." Malik's eyes darted nervously, but Rahman raised his hand, calming the room. "Officer, this is not the first complaint I've heard about your behavior. There have been whispers before. But this time, there is a witness brave enough to stand up. You will answer for this." Malik felt the ground slipping beneath his feet. He wanted to argue, but his words failed. For the first time, he realized he had underestimated the courage of those he thought were weak. After the meeting, Rahman told Aisha and her father that the department would take strict action. Malik would be suspended immediately while an investigation was launched. Justice will be done, Rahman assured them. Outside the station, Aisha breathed deeply, feeling lighter. Her father placed his hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said softly. Word of the incident began to spread quietly in town. Some people were shocked, others were not surprised, but all agreed on one thing: the chief had shown once again why he was respected. He had not protected one of his own, he had protected the truth. Malik, however, sat alone in the locker room, his head in his hands. The uniform that once made him feel powerful now felt like a burden. The whispers in the hallways grew louder each time he walked past. His pride was shattered, and fear replaced it. He knew his future in the force was slipping away. That night, Aisha sat in her room again, but this time, instead of fear, she felt courage growing inside her. She had stood up, spoken out, and faced the very man who had tried to misuse his badge. She realized she was stronger than she thought. And for Chief Rahman, the night ended with a heavy but peaceful heart. He looked at the stars from his office window and whispered to himself, "This is why we wear the badge, not for power, but for justice." The story was not over yet. The suspension was only the beginning. The investigation would bring more truth to light, and the entire town would soon see how one moment of courage could change everything. The news of Malik's suspension spread quickly through the town. People talked about it in tea shops, on buses, and even in the market. Some were shocked that an officer had been caught misusing his power. Others nodded knowingly, saying they had long suspected such behavior. But everyone agreed on one thing: Chief Rahman had done the right thing. In Aisha's university, her friends whispered when she walked into class. At first, she felt uneasy, thinking they were judging her. But soon, one of her close friends came forward and hugged her tightly. "We heard what happened," she said softly. "You're so brave. Not everyone could have spoken up." Another student added, "Because of you, many girls will feel safer now. You showed that even powerful people can be held accountable." Aisha felt a mix of emotions. She was proud that she had stood her ground, but she also felt the weight of the attention. She never wanted fame or recognition, she only wanted safety and fairness. Still, she understood that her choice to speak up was now giving courage to others. Meanwhile, inside the police station, Malik sat in an empty office, waiting for the internal hearing. His badge had been taken away, and his gun was locked in the armory. For the first time since joining the force, he felt powerless. Every sound of footsteps outside the door made him nervous. He knew his career was hanging by a thread. The hearing was set for later that week. Senior officers from the district would come, along with members of the community, to review the case. It was unusual for a local matter to get so much attention, but the chief had insisted. "The people must see that justice is not hidden behind closed doors," he had said firmly. As the day of the hearing arrived, The town hall was prepared with chairs neatly arranged. Police officers, community leaders, and a few selected townspeople were invited. Aisha and her father were also present, sitting quietly at the side. The atmosphere was serious, heavy with anticipation. When Malik entered the hall, his shoulders slumped, his eyes downcast. The uniform that once made him proud now felt like chains around him. People looked at him with disappointment, some even shaking their heads. He avoided eye contact, ashamed. Chief Rahman stood at the front, his presence commanding respect. He began with a firm voice. Today we are here not to humiliate anyone, but to uphold justice. The badge we wear is a symbol of trust. If that trust is broken, it must be addressed openly. No one is above the law, not even those who enforce it. He then turned to Aisha and asked her to recount her experience once more. She stood slowly, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with every word. The hall was silent, every ear listening closely. She spoke with honesty, describing each moment from the night Malik stopped her to the moment the chief arrived. Her father added, "My daughter should never have had to face such fear from the very people who are supposed to protect her. We trust the police with our families, with our children. That trust must never be broken." When they finished, there was a quiet murmur in the hall. Many nodded in agreement, their eyes filled with sympathy for Aisha and disappointment in Malik. Finally, Malik was given the chance to speak. He stood, his face pale, his voice shaky. I lost my way," he admitted. "I thought the badge gave me power over people, but I was wrong. I disrespected the uniform, the community, and myself. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I ask for a chance to learn from this mistake." Some people in the audience frowned, others whispered, unsure if his words were sincere. But everyone could see he was no longer the confident officer he once pretended to be. He looked broken, stripped of the false pride he carried. Chief Rahman listened carefully. Then, in a clear voice, he announced the decision. "Officer Malik is hereby suspended without pay for an indefinite period, and his case will be forwarded to the disciplinary board for further action. Until then, he is removed from all duties. The people of this town deserve honesty, integrity, and safety. This is a reminder to every officer that power is not for abuse, it is for service." The hall echoed with the sound of approval. Some clapped softly, others nodded with relief. It was not just about punishing Malik, it was about restoring trust between the police and the people. After the hearing, many townspeople came to Aisha and her father, thanking them for their courage. "Your voice has made a difference," one elderly woman said. "Because of you, our daughters will walk the streets with more confidence." Aisha felt humbled. She hadn't done it for recognition, but she now realized the impact her actions had created. She had not only protected herself but had also lit a path for others. Later that evening, Rahman walked through the station, his thoughts heavy. He knew this was just one battle in a larger fight. Misuse of authority could happen anywhere, anytime, but as long as people had the courage to speak out, and as long as leaders chose justice over silence, change was possible. He entered his office and found a small letter on his desk. It was from Aisha. She had written, "Thank you for standing by me when I felt alone. Because of you, I now believe justice is real. May God bless you for protecting not just me, but every girl in this town." Rahman held the letter in his hand for a long time. It reminded him why he chose this path many years ago. It wasn't about power or authority, it was about protecting the innocent and ensuring fairness. Across town, Malik sat in his small apartment, staring at the empty wall. His phone buzzed with messages from friends and relatives, but he didn't reply. The shame was too heavy. He realized that one moment of arrogance had destroyed years of his career. The silence in his home was loud, filled with regret. Meanwhile, Aisha sat on her balcony, watching the stars. The night air was cool, and for the first time in days, she felt peace. She had walked through fear, but she had not let it control her. She whispered to herself, "This is not just my story. This is for every girl who deserves respect." The town began to settle into its new rhythm. People remembered the incident not just as a scandal, but as a lesson. Parents told their children about Aisha's bravery, teachers spoke about the importance of standing up for what is right, and officers in the station straightened their backs, knowing that the chief's eyes were always on them. The story was not about punishment alone. It was about hope, change, and the belief that even in dark moments, light could break through. But deep inside, everyone knew the journey was not over. Justice had begun, but the road ahead would test hearts, reputations, and the true meaning of integrity. Days turned into weeks, and the town slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But beneath that calm surface, something had changed. People walked with a little more confidence, and there was more trust in the air. It was not because problems had disappeared, but because everyone had seen what courage and honesty could do when they worked together. For Aisha, life slowly began to feel normal again. She returned to her classes, spent time in the library, and studied late into the night as she always did. But she was not the same girl she had been before the incident. She was stronger now. Her voice carried a new weight, and her friends often looked to her as an example of bravery. One afternoon, her professor called her aside after class. He was an older man, respected for his wisdom. "Aisha," he said kindly, "I heard what you went through, and I want to tell you something. True strength is not in fighting back with anger but in standing tall with dignity, as you did. You will make a fine lawyer one day, not just because of your studies, but because of your heart." Aisha smiled, her eyes shining. That small encouragement filled her with new determination. She realized her dream was not just about building a career, it was about becoming someone who could protect others, just like Chief Roman had protected her. At the police station, Chief Roman continued his work with renewed energy. He introduced stricter rules for his officers. Every officer now had to attend special training sessions about ethics, discipline, and respect for the community. He reminded them again and again, the badge is not a crown. It is a responsibility. Some officers grumbled quietly, but most respected his firmness. They had seen how quickly Malik had fallen, and they knew Rahman would never tolerate dishonor in his department. Slowly, the culture of the station began to shift. Younger officers admired the chief's courage, while older ones straightened their backs, realizing the importance of regaining trust. Meanwhile, Malik's life had changed drastically. Without his badge and salary, he struggled to make ends meet. He avoided going out during the day because he could not bear the looks of disappointment from the townspeople. At night, he sat in silence, replaying every moment of his mistake. He knew he could not erase what he had done, but he wished he could go back and choose differently. One evening, Malik gathered the courage to write a letter. He wrote it not to defend himself but to admit his wrongs. The letter was addressed to Chief Roman and to Aisha. In it, he confessed, "I let pride blind me. I thought I was untouchable, but I was wrong. My actions were shameful. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope my downfall serves as a lesson to others. If my story can stop even one officer from misusing his badge, then at least something good will come from my mistakes." When Rahman received the letter, he read it carefully. He could not erase Malik's actions, but he saw sincerity in the words. He placed the letter in a file, knowing it would serve as a reminder for future officers, power without humility always leads to destruction. As for Aisha, when she received her copy of the letter, she sat quietly, reading it again and again. She did not feel anger anymore. Instead, she felt a quiet sense of closure. Malik's words did not erase the fear he had caused, but they showed that he had finally understood the weight of his actions. She placed the letter in her notebook, not as a wound, but as a memory of strength. Life moved forward. Months later, the town held a community gathering to honor people who had made a positive impact. To her surprise, Aisha's name was called. She stood on the small stage, her hands trembling, as the mayor handed her a certificate of recognition. This young woman, the mayor said, stood up when it was not easy. She reminded us that courage is not about size or strength, but about truth. She showed us that even one voice can make a difference. The crowd clapped warmly. Aisha's parents smiled proudly, tears shining in their eyes. Aisha herself did not feel like a hero, she only felt like someone who had done what was necessary. But as she looked around at the faces of young girls in the audience, she realized her story had given them hope. Chief Roman stood in the crowd, his hands folded behind his back. He watched quietly, his heart full of pride. He knew the recognition was not just for Aisha but for every person who believed in justice. As the applause continued, he thought to himself, the future will be safe if more people like her rise. That evening, after the event, Aisha approached Raman. "Sir," she said softly, "thank you for everything. If you hadn't appeared that night, I don't know what would have happened." Raman shook his head gently. "No, daughter. You are the one who showed courage. I only did my duty. Remember, the world changes not when officers like me stand up, but when ordinary people like you refuse to be silent." Aisha nodded, holding his words close to her heart. She knew her journey was only beginning. One day, she would stand in a courtroom as a lawyer, fighting for people who felt powerless, just as she had once felt. As the night sky stretched above the town, life continued in its quiet ways. Children laughed in the streets, families gathered for dinner, and lights flickered in the windows of small homes. But in the hearts of the people, the memory of one night remained strong, a night when a young woman stood firm, when a corrupt officer faced justice, and when a chief proved that true leadership was about protecting the weak. The lesson spread beyond the town. Visitors who heard the story carried it to other places, telling others about the girl who stood against abuse of power and the chief who supported her. The story became more than just an incident, it became a symbol of hope, courage, and fairness. For Malik, life never returned to what it was before. He remained suspended, uncertain if he would ever wear the uniform again. But he had changed. He no longer saw the badge as a tool of power but as something sacred that he had lost. Perhaps, in time, he would rebuild his life in another way, carrying with him the heavy reminder of his mistake. For Aisha, the path ahead was clear. She continued her studies with renewed focus. Each book she read, each class she attended, carried a new purpose. She was not just studying for herself anymore, she was preparing to serve others, to ensure justice was not a dream but a reality. And for Chief Raman, his legacy grew stronger. People spoke of him with respect, calling him a man who never bowed to corruption. His leadership reminded everyone that authority is not about fear, but about trust. The story closed not with anger, but with peace. Aisha had found her voice, Malik had learned his lesson, and the town had witnessed the power of truth. In the end, it was not about punishment alone, it was about change, growth, and the reminder that even in the darkest of moments, light can appear suddenly, like the chief's car pulling into the street that night. And just like that, the story of one young woman and one honest chief became a story for the whole community, a story that would be told again and again, to remind everyone that justice is never too far away when courage meets integrity.